The night of September 10th, 1906. Three men are crouched in the dark outside Mission Junction, British Columbia. It is cold, it is quiet, and the man giving the orders is 62 years old, which, if you know anything about train robbery, is an absurd age to still be doing this. His name is Bill Miner, and here's the thing about Bill Miner that nobody tells you. He wasn't some reckless desperado. He wasn't a drunk with a gun and a bad idea. This man was methodical. He studied train schedules the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He chose his stops with the kind of patience most people can't apply to anything. He had been doing this for 40 years across 2 countries, and he had, by every honest count, gotten away with it more times than probability should have allowed. The newspapers called him the gentleman bandit. He was polite during robberies. He never shot anyone. He coined the phrase, "hands up," not as a threat, but almost as a courtesy. Comply, and we all go home. He was good. He was careful. And tonight, he was certain. The train comes. He stops it, clean, controlled, exactly the way he'd done it a dozen times before. He moves to the express car, the door opens, and then silence. Not the silence of a man who found what he came for, the other kind. The silence of a man whose hands are moving through a car and finding the wrong things. Papers, packages, a bottle of liver pills. He had stopped the wrong train. The total haul from that express car, from a robbery Bill Miner had planned, scouted, and committed with 40 years of professional experience behind him, was $15.75. $15.75. Now, every channel that covers this story will tell you this was just bad luck, a miscalculation, an honest mistake from a man who had a remarkable run. That's the safe version. That's the comfortable version. Here's what they're not telling you. The wrong train wasn't the mistake. The wrong train was just the moment the mistake became visible. The real error had been building inside Bill Miner for decades. A single belief, never examined, never tested, buried under 40 years of narrow escapes and good timing. And by the time that express car door opened on nothing, it was already too late to fix it. This is that story. Let me tell you what Bill Miner was not. He was not a hothead. He was not a killer. He was not the kind of man who walked into a situation without knowing exactly how he was going to walk out of it. Every story you've heard about the romantic outlaw, the reckless cowboy, the man running on adrenaline and bad whiskey, that is not this man. That version is a lie the legends sell because the truth is more uncomfortable. The truth is that Bill Miner was disciplined. Born in 1846 in Kentucky, raised poor, raised restless, raised in the particular kind of American poverty that doesn't leave a man many doors to choose from. His first arrest came at 16, stolen horses, not exactly the crime of a mastermind, and the system did what the system always does. It processed him, punished him, and released him back into the same circumstances that produced him in the first place. He was 23 years old when he walked into San Quentin for the first time. Here's the thing about San Quentin, and this is the part nobody wants to sit with. It didn't break him, it educated him. Not in the way a rehabilitation program would, in the way that any competitive environment educates the people who pay attention. He watched, he cataloged, he came out understanding exactly what had gone wrong and building a sharper version of the same operation. By his 30s, the operation looked like this. He studied train schedules the way an engineer studies load capacity. He selected stops based on geography, remote enough for a clean exit, close enough to a border or a ridge line that pursuit became complicated. He was polite during every single robbery, courteous almost. He never fired a weapon at a human being in his entire career. He gave clear instructions and kept his word when people followed them. He coined the phrase, "hands up." Think about that for a second. a phrase that entered the American language, that you have heard in 100 films, 100 television shows, 100 Halloween costumes, came from a man who used it because it was efficient, because it communicated everything necessary in 2 words: comply, stay calm, nobody gets hurt. It wasn't theatrical, it was operational. He served 20 years in San Quentin across 2 separate sentences, and he walked out in 1901 at 55 years old and moved to Canada. Canada, where nobody knew him, where the name Bill Miner was an American problem, where he could become George Edwards, charming rancher, good neighbor, the kind of older gentleman who helped with fences and remembered the names of children. And every channel covering this story will tell you that moment, that fresh start in Canada, was inspiring. A man reinventing himself, a second chance. It's a lie, not a malicious lie, a comfortable one. Here's what was actually happening. Bill Miner had spent 30 years building a perfect feedback loop. He robbed, he got caught, he improved, he got away. Every escape confirmed the story. I am the exception. The system catches other men, not me. Every year he avoided consequence felt like proof of something. He should have been asking what it was costing him. He never asked. That question, the one he never asked, is what the rest of this story is about. Princeton, British Columbia, 1901. George Edwards arrives in town with an easy smile, an American accent, and no apparent history. He's 55 years old. He has the kind of weathered, unhurried manner that small communities trust instinctively. A man who seems to have already seen enough of the world to have no interest in causing trouble in yours. He helps with fences. He remembers names. He's patient with children in the particular way that men who have spent a long time alone sometimes are. Carefully, gratefully patient, like it's something they don't want to waste. The neighbors like him. The town likes him. He is, by every visible measure, exactly the kind of man a small Canadian ranching community needed in 1901. And here is the part that should make you uncomfortable, because it made me uncomfortable when I really sat with it. He was that man. That's not performance. George Edwards was not a mask Bill Miner put over his real face. George Edwards was a real face, the one that had never gotten enough time to exist. The man who could have been, parallel to the man who was. And for a few years in Princeton, those 2 versions of him almost merged into one. Almost. Because the money runs out. It always runs out. And a man who has spent 30 years solving the problem of money in one specific way does not, at 58 years old, suddenly develop a different solution. May 10th, 1904. Bill Miner, because George Edwards was always Bill Miner underneath, stops the Canadian Pacific Railway Express near Mission Junction. The operation is clean, controlled, professionally executed. He takes $7,000 in gold and U.S. bonds, disappears into the geography he has spent 3 years quietly memorizing, and is back in Princeton before the investigation has a name for its suspect. $7,000, clean escape, new country. The Canadian papers pick up the story, and the phrase "gentleman bandit" is back in print, this time north of the border. He's 58 years old, and he has just pulled off a near-perfect robbery in a country that didn't know he existed. And I want you to feel what that moment felt like from the inside, because this is the peak. This is the highest point of the graph. Everything that follows is the other side of it, and the other side drops fast. But standing there in 1904, with $7,000 and a clean exit, and a community that still calls him George and means it warmly, Bill Miner had every reason to believe the feedback loop still worked, that the pattern still held, that he was still the exception. That belief is what killed him, not immediately, but the way a crack in a foundation kills a house, quietly, invisibly, right up until the moment it doesn't. September 10th, 1906. 2 years have passed. The money is running low again. He has 2 associates, younger men, less experienced, and a plan based on the assumption that the CPR is running another Gold Express on the same corridor he hit in 1904. Here's where I need you to pay attention, because this is the moment, the single operational moment where everything changes. And it doesn't look dramatic. It never looks dramatic from the inside. The scouting was rushed, not abandoned, not ignored, rushed. The timing was close, but not confirmed. He was operating on pattern recognition where the situation required fresh verification. He had done this route before. He had done this type of operation dozens of times, and somewhere in that accumulated confidence, the rigor slipped, just slightly, just enough, just the amount that a man with 40 years of success behind him would be most likely to allow, because 40 years of success is exactly the thing that makes rigor.
Here's what most people get wrong about how Bill Miner got caught. They imagine a dramatic chase, a shootout maybe, a clever trap, something cinematic that matches the mythology of the man. And every channel that covers this story gravitates toward that version because it's cleaner, it's more satisfying, and it lets the legend stay intact a little longer. The truth is quieter, and quieter is always worse. The Northwest Mounted Police did not catch Bill Miner by being faster than him or smarter than him in any single moment of brilliance. They caught him the way slow, patient, systematic institutions always catch people who believe they are exceptions, by simply not stopping, by working the community, by understanding that a man who had lived as George Edwards for 5 years in Princeton had left something behind that no amount of careful planning could fully erase. Relationships, habits, faces that recognized his face. They talked to people. They kept talking to people. And 12 days after the robbery at Mission Junction, 12 days, which sounds fast until you understand that Bill Miner had nowhere left to go that didn't eventually lead back to someone who knew his name, they found him at Douglas Lake. 62 years old, sitting in a British Columbia jail. The name Bill Miner back in every newspaper on the continent. The evidence was not circumstantial. A witness placed him at the scene. Stolen goods were recovered. His associates, younger and less experienced and far less composed under pressure, did not hold together the way he did. The case was assembled quickly, methodically, without drama. The Mounties had done their job, and the job was done. And now we get to the part I keep coming back to, the part that the more I sat with it, the more it stopped feeling like history and started feeling like a diagnosis. The trial. Bill Miner walked into that courtroom and performed. That's the only word for it, performed. He was charming, self-deprecating. He carried himself with the particular kind of unbothered dignity that made the gallery lean forward in their seats. He gave them the gentleman bandit. He gave them exactly what they had read about in the papers, exactly what the legend promised, as if the whole proceeding was a stage he had been booked to play, rather than a reckoning he was being forced to face. The jury convicted him in 2 hours, and here's the thing. Here is the thing that I don't think the comfortable version of this story is willing to say out loud. The performance didn't fail because it was unconvincing. It failed because it was irrelevant. The evidence didn't care how charming he was. The court didn't need to like him. The 2 hours the jury took wasn't deliberation, it was paperwork. But Bill Miner kept performing anyway. And that is not a small detail. That is the whole diagnosis right there, if you're willing to look at it directly. The performance had been running for so long. The courteous robber, the gentleman outlaw, the old man who kept escaping the system and made everyone, even the people who should have known better, secretly root for him. That version had been running for so long that when the moment came that required him to be something other than the gentleman bandit, he had no idea how to access that person, because that person had been standing still while the performance kept moving, and eventually the distance between them became too great to cross.
You probably haven't robbed a train, but I'd be willing to bet, and I mean this without any comfort attached, that you recognize the loop, the thing you keep doing with different details, but the same logic underneath. The definition of success you built early in harder circumstances that you've been executing ever since without stopping to ask whether it's still taking you somewhere or just keeping you busy. The performance you've maintained for so long that you've lost the thread back to the person who started it. That's the story Bill Miner never got to tell about himself, because telling it would have meant stopping, and stopping for him was the one thing that felt more dangerous than anything the law could do. The outlaws knew this at the end. The legends just never mention it. New story tomorrow.